What's up, everybody? It's another beautiful Sunday here in Georgia, and today I am, much like every other weekend, spending way too much time in my garage working on my E92 BMW drift car. The goal for today is to get the transmission tunnel cut out and the new bigger tunnel framed up and welded all in. So FD allows us to expand the transmission tunnel to make it easier to remove the transmission or to remove the bell housing. And actually the BMW currently has a pretty big transmission tunnel. We're only gaining a couple inches on either side by cutting the whole thing out and making a whole new one. But just for ease of access and building a car from the frame up, I think if I didn't do this part and just made a cover or something for the top of it, I would regret it later. So I'm gonna cut the whole thing out and make a new one. Look in here, that's kind of dark. I got the roof on, so roof's up there. If we look in here, actually it's pretty big. I don't know if the automatic transmission tunnels were really big and or why they're so big, but many guys will just cut the top off this. In fact, the Eurofighters are done this way. I think Blake Olson's car is done this way. I don't know about anybody else's actually, but they'll just cut the top off of it, make a removable plate, and cut the shifter hole wherever their shifter comes out, and that'll be it. It's big enough. I decided, since I've cut so much of the car up and also since I've added a dash bar, that I was going to go ahead and cut this whole thing out. Originally, I was a little skeptical of cutting it out because of this brace. So there's this monster brace right here that basically connects the frame rail to the frame rail. And I didn't want to cut that out because it should offer a good amount of structural rigidity. But, you know, since I added the dash bar right there, and my motor's actually going to be on a motor plate between the frame rails, because I have an aluminum subframe, so I can't bolt my motor to my aluminum subframe, unfortunately. I think those two items will get rid of the need for this brace, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it out. So I'm just down here hanging out in the engine bay. So we have to follow FD rules. They're very strict about how big this transmission tunnel can be. So from the windshield to the top of the transmission tunnel has to be a minimum of 10 inches, which lands somewhere right around here. The width has to be a maximum of 18 inches, and the taper down into the car has to be a maximum length of 36 inches. So we're going to follow those very specifically. In fact, we're going to go a little under to make sure I have no problems in the future, because this is not something that's easy to replace. Let's start figuring this shit out. Alright, I got the FD rule book here. I don't know if you can see it on camera. Section 2. What is it? I don't know, section 2.1 or 2.2. Section 2, 2.1, chassis modifications. We scroll down to 2.11, firewall and transmission tunnel modifications. We can change it, that's what A says. But this is the good stuff. So the first one we're going to mark is B. This is a minimum of 10 inches. You can see dimension B, minimum dimension of 10 inches between the bottom of the windshield and the top of the transmission tunnel. So that's the first one we're going to measure. We're going to do it about 9.5, well actually we're going to do it about 10.5 inches because this is a minimum. Kind of depends on where it lands, like around here too. The lip is right at 10 inches. I don't want to cut too little, you know? Or cut too much, really. Really tough to tell though. So we're going to cut right along here, which the center is right here. So we're going to, now dimension B is done. That's 10.25 inches right there. So that's where we're going. It's about as low as we can really cut it anyway. So dimension A, how wide we can make this thing. Dimension A, we scroll down, we look, tunnel width may be no wider than 18 inches. Okay, I got my plumb bob set up. It's just a piece of string with a nut on the end, and it's just hanging freely in midair. And we have 18 inches, so if this is the center line to the car, we can go 9 inches on either side of this center line, and just to be safe, I'm going to cut it down to 8 3/4, so that leaves a 1/2 inch total on either side. Maybe I'll cut a whole inch off. 8 3/4 should be alright. All right, we've got our 2 marks, and if we measure between them, hopefully we have less than 18 inches. I am right on that line. We are right at 17.5, which is right where we want it to be, to have a little margin for error, and that's pretty good. So those are the marks we're going to use. We have our top mark here. I'm going to take a square and try to make a nice right angle in here somewhere. Looks like I might cut out part of my patch here, actually. And same thing over here. One thing I didn't really take into consideration, but it's really good, is I think this is the OEM firewall, not this, which means it comes back into the car a little bit here. This means that even by the rules, I can set the engine against this portion, which means getting rid of this allows me like an extra 1.5 inches to move the engine backwards, which is really great because I have a lot of forward weight in my car and in my E36. Because this is just a brace. This is a chassis brace. But this is the firewall. I cannot go past the firewall with the engine, but nothing says I can't go past this brace because it's not the firewall. So that's pretty interesting. When I cut this out, I am going to plate the end of this. I'm not just going to leave an open hole into my frame rails. And that is right on 10 inches. Pretty scary, but I really can't do it any lower than that, so that's the way it's got to be. Sorry about the lighting in here, guys. But it's a nice day out, so I have the garage door open and the lights are on. I took the roof off so you can see a little better, but this is the best I can do. Anywho, next thing we have to do is measure how far this new transmission tunnel can go. So there's gonna be a big taper since it's gonna be wider. So it's gonna taper from here in, and it's gonna be taller, so it's gonna taper from here down. You can see we're really not gaining that much room, but I know I'm gonna regret it if I don't do it. So I'm doing it. 2.1.1 F taper length from the firewall to the end of the transmission tunnel and to the beginning of the drive shaft hump may be no longer than 36 inches. It says from the firewall to the end of the transmission tunnel. That's the taper length. So actually, that's gonna be the length from here to here, not the length from here to here, because the entire taper can only be 36 inches. So, okay. Straight from there. Wow, that is really far actually. Jesus. 36 inches is way down here. Am I even face towards that? Look at this. I hope you guys can see it now. 36 inches is actually here-ish. That's a really long taper. That's great. We're going to do it a little shorter. You know what? We're going to do it right against here. We're going to do it at 33.5 because that way I can keep these brackets here. And I don't know what I'll use these for, but I can get rid of the rest of it up here. This is where the factory taper starts, so it'll be a little taller and wider, but that's not so bad. I can't believe they give you so much room. I've seen some that are like straight up. So one more issue with trying to pull this further back is that the drive shaft hump, per the rules, has different dimensions and different criteria than the transmission tunnel does. And if I'm looking at this, I would call this the transmission tunnel and this the drive shaft hump. Now I know the shifter hole's there, but I don't know where the drive shaft comes out on a stock BMW automatic transmission. But I would consider this the transmission tunnel and this the drive shaft hump. So this we're not going to modify, but from here up, that's all going to be different. That way I don't have to fill in this hole. I can drill a new hole for wherever the new shifter is going to be. And I get the benefit of the bigger transmission tunnel for changes and clutch changes and things like that. I got the cut lines all drawn out here, basically as square as I could. I mean, I used a square, but you know, it's pretty kind of rough thing to be drawn on. Anyway, when you measure from this line to this line, 17.5 inches. From the top of the windshield to this line, 10.25 inches. And of course the taper on the inside is much less than 36. This means that this transmission tunnel should be completely within the rule book. And now I keep referencing the rule book because this is a kind of a scary part of your car to cut out, and it's very difficult to fix this if you mess it up. I mean, I don't know how I'd weld this back in and, you know, fix this to FD spec if this was too big. So this is how I'm going to do it. I'll cut this out. I'll cut along the floor. Then we can start making the frame for the new one, which is going to be made out of 3/8 rod. Man, I hope I don't mess this up. This is actually kind of nerve-wracking. Okay, so originally I was going to cut the front out, then cut the whole transmission tunnel out at the floor here. But looking at it, I kind of decided that the floor was really wide, and it's also where all these indentations and kind of changes in the floor start. So if I were to put a solid rod from here to there, I might have to fill a lot of this in with sheet metal. So I thought, okay, well, this is pretty wide down here, not super necessary to make it any wider. You know, where's the flattest point? That's kind of right in the middle here, this nice section here. So I'm going to make a cut from this corner down to that corner and make my transmission tunnel come out from this point here instead of cutting this whole thing out. So I thought this transmission tunnel would be pretty easy to cut through. It is not. There's sections where it's like 3 or 4 layers of reinforcement and 22 gauge or 20 gauge sheet metal, and it is taking a long time to cut through it. So long, in fact, that this is basically too hot to hold, so I have to let it cool down for a little while. I go through, I don't know, maybe one a month of these things, but I mean, they're only like $10, so they last for what I expect them to, I guess. But yeah, this thing's really hot. Well, I really should have taken my own advice instead of putting a welding glove on and continuing to use this, because she broken. And well, maybe she still moves a little. Now I gotta go to Harbor Freight and pick up another one before I can finish. Back in business. Like the transmission tunnel that just keeps on giving. Look at that. It's out. And man, that's pretty heavy. Clean up back here. Not bad. Here's what it looks like with no transmission tunnel. Less than 18 inches wide, more than 10 inches from the windshield, and less than 36-inch taper. That's what the cut should look like. Now we're going to frame it all in with 3/8 rod. Make sure that when the sheet metal's on it, it's still not above the regulations. We're outside the rules, and then we'll be done for the day. I'll tin it in later. That's what she looks like. And you can see it's really easy to mess up because the firewall's not symmetrical, even though it looks like it should be. So that almost messed me up pretty good. But yeah, let's get some stuff welded in here and make it look nice. That's what it looks like outside the car. I was lucky that this was just above 10 inches from the windshield to there, because it would have been brutal if I had to cut through the middle of this or something. All right, now that we got this huge hole in the middle of the car here, I went ahead and measured everything again. We check out. I mean, we are under 18 inches in that opening. We are above 10 inches from the windshield at all portions, and we are below 36 inches tapered into the car. And what's really interesting is the car is not symmetrical at all. The driver's side firewall is actually further away from this point in the car than the passenger side, which means if we tried to taper further back here, I would have been outside the rule books, because this, I measured 34 inches to here, but actually from here to that corner over there it measures 35.5. So we're really lucky that we left some room for error, because we barely fit in the rules, but we definitely fit in. There's no question that we're within the rules. So I'm pretty stoked on that. I'm going to go ahead and start cutting some 3/8 rod to fit these edges and kind of make this frame to weld some sheet metal to later. But here's what I came up with. So I made a 3/8 rod frame. I measured everything like 100 times, so I'm within the rules here. The only issue I had was how close it really was to 10 inches from the windshield there. So instead of going up and across that cut that I made that's right at 10 inches, or really it's probably right at 10 1/4, I just wasn't comfortable with how close it was. I moved it down a little bit, and I'm actually just going to weld a piece of sheet flat against there, so it's a piece of the firewall. Really, honestly, it was within the rules anyway, but I didn't want somebody to look at it, you know, diagonally or something and say, oh, it's not in spec, it's against the rules. So I didn't want to deal with that. But yeah, the skeleton's all done, the frame's all done, it's all tacked in. I got to weld it along the seam, the sides against the car body, which is going to be really horrible because I only have a MIG welder. And then I got to make the removable top, which will be held on with Zeus fasteners, and it'll be done. Actually pretty basic from my original idea to what actually ended up coming to fruition. But yeah, just a bigger transmission tunnel. So thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing. If you like this type of content, please hit the subscribe button, please hit the like button, and I'll see you guys next week.